Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I am your host, Dan. This is a new podcast about the box office, about how much money do movies make at the box office, essentially. It's kind of a nerdy, kind of a wonky podcast that I've always wanted to do. I've been following the box office in movies for the last 20 years. I have another podcast called the Hot Song Podcast that I've been doing with my friend Chris for almost a year and a half, 2 years now. And so I had one podcast under my belt. I decided to start another one here about something that I am super into and super passionate about and kind of obsessive about as well. So if you're interested in movies and interested in the box office and analyzing how well a movie does at the box office or sometimes how poorly it does, this is probably the perfect podcast for you. I had one episode last week. And after listening to it, I decided that it might make more sense to split the podcast into two separate episodes per week. Last week, I covered basically what had happened the weekend before at the box office and also my predictions for the next weekend. I feel like it might make more sense to have an early podcast in the week to recap what happened over the weekend and then have a later podcast, maybe Thursday or Wednesday, to talk about the upcoming releases at the box office and make some predictions about how well they'll do. So this episode, the first one of the week here, I'm recording on October 16th, Sunday night here. We just got some numbers in today for what happened this weekend. So this episode, I'm going to do a little bit of a recap of where we're at this weekend and how on or off my predictions were from last week. And it turns out, kind of embarrassingly, I call myself sort of an amateur expert, and I was totally wrong about both of the movies that opened up this weekend. I was right about the dud, but I mean, that was a no-brainer. Max Steel was going to flop no matter what anybody said. The two movies I got wrong were the two movies that ended up on top this weekend. The first one is The Accountant. This is the Ben Affleck, Warner Brothers action thriller. I wanted to say spy, but is it really a spy thing? I actually didn't see this movie. I wanted to, but then I was like, the reviews last week were not good. They kind of got like a 50 on Metacritic around that and about a 50 on Rotten Tomatoes. So it just seemed kind of like a dud, and I didn't want to like take time out of my day to go see it. So I also kind of felt, based on the critical reaction, that the film would not do well. And I made a prediction of 13.5 million last weekend. Well, in reality, it actually did $24.7 million this weekend. And now, again, these are early, I wouldn't call them early forecasts. They're just the first numbers out for the weekend. They're essentially just estimates on how well the actual studio thinks it'll do. They're usually very accurate. As to the actual amount that it did. The actual numbers come out usually Monday morning, Monday early afternoon. But these are pretty much going to be right on the money as to how well it did. So The Accountant ended up with 24.7 million, and it opened up on 3,300 screens last weekend, or I should say this weekend still. And so the per theater average there was $7,400. Now the per theater average is just divide the weekend gross, 24.7 million, divided by the theaters or number of theaters that it opened in this case, about 3,300 theaters. And so my thought process last week was that based on how the reviews are coming in and the fact that it didn't feel like The Accountant was super hyped. I just didn't hear a lot of people talking about it. And like, it's hype is such a subjective thing to measure. There's certainly ways you can look at it on social media, like Twitter, I guess Instagram. Do people Instagram movies before they come out? I don't even know. I'm not the social media expert by any stretch of the imagination. But hype is just this super subjective thing that people have always been trying to tap into to figure out how well a movie is going to do. And there's like the Rotten Tomato scores, like I Want to See It, I guess is the name of it, or something like that. So you can get some ideas about what people are posting on social media about a movie to measure hype. But in a lot of the cases, it's just sort of like watching a lot of TV and being on like Reddit a lot and just seeing how people are reacting to trailers and stuff. And like, oddly enough, some movies that you wouldn't think have a lot of hype do. Like, I remember Sully like which came out in September, which is about the pilot who landed the plane in the Hudson. It had a ton of hype. And like I saw Tom Hanks on Colbert with his mustache pretending to be the pilot, and it felt like everybody was like talking about it that week. And so that's just like a subjective way to view hype. And I kind of went with that and went with my gut on that, and ended up making a really good prediction on Sully doing overperforming on its opening weekend. I just didn't feel the same sort of hype with The Accountant at all. It just felt like people were like, I guess it's coming out. But it ended up doing really well. So it had a $7,400 per theater average. Now, for a wide release, you're definitely successful. It's going to be like 4,000 and above, probably. In the 3,000 area, you're talking about kind of middling. Anything below that, you got problems if you're in the 2,000 or below range. So The Accountant did very well. It sounds like audiences enjoyed it. I actually have to look up the cinema score. I think it was an A. So cinema score is a customer survey that is done the Thursday and Friday when a movie opens. They basically go around to all these different major cities. There's a list of them somewhere. I don't know what they are. They've been doing this survey since 1978. It's kind of a controversial survey within like the box office nerd community. I think a lot of people don't have a lot of respect for cinema score just because they feel like it's maybe a little bit too old school and doesn't use new statistical sort of models like maybe it should. In any event, it is sort of the industry standard, so I always talk about it. I always mention it just because I don't know, I think it's super fascinating to bring up and see what people thought about the movie. And so The Accountant got a cinema score of A, which is like it sounds, very good. That basically means the people who went out of their way to see the movie on opening night, the opening preview nights on Thursdays, or they went to it on opening day on Friday, they really enjoyed what they saw. And from the stuff that I've been reading online, a lot of people were pleasantly surprised by the movie and how good it was and how much they enjoyed it. Now, of course, people weren't like, oh, this is the greatest movie ever. This didn't really have a John Wick type aura to it. Because remember when John Wick opened, it was sort of like, what? Like Keanu Reeves, like, what? His dog dies and now he's getting revenge on a Russian mob. It sounded so stupid. But I had a really close friend of mine who... we were at brunch or something, and he just like, dude, you have to see this movie. And he like went on about it for about 20 minutes, and it was just like he was so passionate about it, and he said it was like one of the better movies I've ever seen. So I finally sat down and watched it, and I was honestly blown away. Now, it wasn't like super high art, but it was like one of the better action movies I think I've ever seen. Like, it's definitely one of the better action movies of the last 10 years. People weren't talking about The Accountant like this online. They just basically said it was very enjoyable. And the cinema score of A backs that up. So despite the fact that critics didn't exactly connect with the movie very well, it seems like the audiences did, and they really enjoyed it. It ended up getting about 1.3 million, if my memory serves me correctly, on its Thursday previews, which was very similar to Girl on the Train, which opened the weekend before. So The Accountant basically popped off a little bit. It definitely had a great weekend, a lot better than I think most people were expecting. Much better than I had predicted, because remember, I had predicted it at about 13.5 million, so I was about $10 million off. Oh, actually more than 10 million. I can't even do basic arithmetic, Jesus. In any event, I got that one wrong, and I also got the Kevin Hart movie wrong, to a lesser extent. So Kevin Hart, What Now? Which essentially is like a concert stand-up film, I guess, released by Universal. He's done a couple of these. It came in at $11.9 million this weekend. It opened up at 2,500 screens. Its per theater average was about $4,670, which is a pretty good run for this movie. I had predicted that it was just going to had a per theater average in like the 3,000s, and so I think about $7 million for it to open. I don't know, the Kevin Hart movie, like, I just don't understand why people would go to a movie theater to watch a stand-up concert film. It makes zero sense to me. All the stand-up I watch if it's new, comes out on Netflix. Like, it's just like, isn't that what people do these days? I don't know. In any event, Kevin Hart's super popular guy, and apparently he still has some cachet to open a concert film essentially at almost a little bit under $12 million this weekend. So that's pretty awesome for him. And now, is this thing going to have legs? And when I say legs, it's like, what's the multiplier going to be on this weekend? Like, a lot of times most films, if they're good, end up having something like a 3 multiplier or a high 2 multiplier. If they're great, like I was talking about this last week, Gone Girl had a 4 multiplier, which that basically means is you multiply the opening weekend. What's the multiplication of the opening weekend to its final domestic total? And so if you're looking at something like The Accountant, it opened up at 24. So it sounds like people liked it. So let's say it does a 3x multiplier. So it should end around $75 million domestically. Kevin Hart, though, I feel like the multiplier might be low on this. And I actually checked his other films like this, and some of them are actually a lot higher. But it gets skewed because if something's released limited in a limited release and then they expand it wide, then the opening weekend's going to be skewed a lot lower than if it was opening wide. So it's Kevin Hart opened up basically at $12 million this weekend. I think it'll probably do, if it was at 12, maybe like a 2.5. So probably like $30 million total, maybe. I think under that, probably 28. Any event, so The Accountant did well. I was wrong about that. Kevin Hart did well. I was wrong about that. The other opener this weekend was Max Steel. This was the movie based on the 90s toy, I guess. I don't know anything about Max Steel. I'm not going to pretend like I know. It's some Mattel toy that I didn't have when I was growing up. Maybe I was too old at this point. It did terribly. I mean, absolutely an incredible flop. It opened at 2.1 million, 2.2 million, about that. Just awful. I mean, like, I think everybody knew that this was going to happen, but it's just sad to see some of these movies open so low. You think of like all the people who worked on it and like all the marketing that went into it. I think this was produced for not a lot of money. I want to say like maybe $15-20 million. So it's not like a huge financial sort of failure. Although who knows? I mean, how much did they spend on marketing? They could have spent $30-40 million on marketing to open a movie wide. That being said, like, I didn't see any marketing for it hardly at all. I think I saw the trailer once. This was released, Max Steel was released by Open Road Films. And I was sort of really interested in who these guys are. They're not actually, I thought that they were an independent company, but they're actually not. They're it's kind of a weird company. They're owned by AMC and Regal, like two of the biggest theater companies in the world. And it sounds like that it's kind of an experiment. They're trying something new. Basically, what's happening is these huge corporations are getting super nervous about what's happening in the film industry. And so, 10 years ago, the theaters and the big studios basically had a monopoly on the entire distribution model. Then Netflix comes along, and in the beginning, remember when Netflix first started? I think the big movie studios were like, ugh, whatever. Like, sure, we'll do business with these little ants, just to sort of get an extra stream of revenue from DVDs and stuff like that. But as Netflix really caught on, even with the physical media where they would ship out DVDs, it became really clear that something was switching in the industry. And the big companies, I mean, look at Blockbuster. Blockbuster basically was the movie rental company of the United States, at least. And they got broadsided by Netflix and basically destroyed. And I can't figure out the exact timeline, but it had to be less than a decade, right? I mean, Blockbuster is no longer in business, although I think there's still some independent Blockbusters or something. Like, somebody bought up part of the chain in some part of the United States. But basically, Netflix steamrolled this huge juggernaut, in like no time flat with their subscription model of, you know, you can get like 3 DVDs or as many as DVDs as you want. I think one of the programs was, or subscriptions was. So basically with a new distribution model, they destroyed a huge corporation. And I feel like what is now happening is that Netflix, after they jumped to streaming, and then the big companies were like, oh, I think they got really nervous then because they realized the future of entertainment, movies, TV is streaming. It's streaming 100%. Sure, I still have cable. I like cable, but if there was a streaming alternative that matched cable, then I would totally buy it in 1 second. Like, I wouldn't even have to think about it twice. Streaming's the future of everything. And the moment when Netflix, came out with House of Cards, Orange is the New Black, it was game on. I think all the major studios are sweating bullets these days because they realize that Amazon Studios, Netflix, these companies with tons of essentially revenue to throw around are making original content, and they own the means of distribution. I mean, it's that vertical integration that can crush corporations that have been around for 100 years because everything just changes on a dime. And so I think Regal and AMC are pretty nervous about the impact of Netflix and Amazon Studios and companies like that on the theater business. And so, I think Open Road is a response to that. And it's been super hit and miss, man. Like, Open Road released The Gray back in January 2012, which did really well. That's a Liam Neeson film about the plane crash, and he's fighting wolves with like little airplane liquor bottles. Remember that? It budget 25 million, grossed 77. I don't know if that's internet. This is Wikipedia. I don't know if that's international or domestic. I'm almost sure that's domestic, actually. I'm sorry. I'm sure that's international. I think The Gray only did about 50 million domestically. So Open Road's had some really good movies. End of Watch was cool. They put out some duds. Like, they put out Side Effects by Soderbergh. Did anybody see that movie? Someone must have seen that movie because that was on HBO a lot. And I was like, what is this? Soderbergh? I had no idea it came out. Jobs, the first, they got to base first on that one with the Ashton Kutcher Steve Jobs biopic. Machete Kills, stuff like that. Some really bad movies. Haunted House 2. Was Rosewater good? Did anybody see Rosewater, the Jon Stewart movie? I don't think they did. That did not do very well at all. But they put out stuff like Spotlight, the Best Picture last year, which was an amazing movie. Obviously, it won Best Picture. That's not always the case. Crash 2005, never forget. They also put out like 999, Snowden, but then they put out stuff like Max Steel, and you're like, what are you guys doing? Like, what's the thought process there? Like, how do you expect to release a movie wide in theaters and sort of get your monies back or have it make financial sense? But then when you think about it, this is AMC and Regal. They own the theaters. So one way or another, they're making some money off of this. So just giving you an example with Max Steel, okay, let's say it makes $2 million this weekend at the box office. In the United States, the way the deal is set up is that the studio gets half the money and the theaters get half the money for the rentals, as they call it. So normally, the studio that made this would only get $1 million of that $2 million that it made this weekend. But I think, because Regal and AMC own this, they're going to get a bigger piece of that pie because they also get part of the theater rentals of where it played. So I guess, they get money coming and going in this one, but still, what a flop. What a disaster. People are talking online, is this one of the worst wide releases ever? And I have to sort of look this up again, but I think it's not really, it's bad, but for some reason over the last few years, there has been a spat of really, really bad wide openings. Open Road films also had Rock the Casbah, which came out. That was that Bill Murray film. Came out about a year ago, October 23rd, 2015. That opened at 2,000 theaters and only did 1.4 million. Its per theater average was $700. I mean, that is so epically terrible. But you also had Gem and the Holograms, which opened the same weekend last year and came in at only a per theater average of $570. I mean, I don't know what's going on recently, but I think it has to do with this distribution model shifting, and people are staying home, watching Netflix, watching shows on Amazon, and not going to the theaters for certain types of movies. For some types of movies, like, they're still going. Like, if it's Jurassic World, if it's Star Wars, people are gonna go to the theaters. I mean, look at what those movies did last year. Those were way beyond anybody's expectations. Even the box office nerds, we were like, what is going on? Like, it was amazing to watch, actually. So you have it almost like, it's like splitting off into two different types of movies. You have your theater movies, which are huge blockbusters, Marvel movies, stuff like that, stuff that you want to see on a big screen. But I feel like everything else, the mid-tier and below, is getting lost in the shuffle, and we're seeing that a lot more of these terrible wide open releases. Now, Max Steel, does Max Steel really fit into that model? Probably not. It seems just like a terrible idea, and someone just didn't really think it through. It would have made more sense as like maybe like a TV show or like a TV movie to play on like whatever children watch these days. Nickelodeon, is that still a thing? It must be. In any event, Max Steel is a huge bomb. Did super poorly, but it was only if we're counting releases, wide releases with over 2,000 theaters, it was only the 13th worst wide release. It made about $1,000, so it kept itself out of that top 10 worst all time. And so that was the bigger new releases last week. And I kind of want to go through a couple of holdovers, movies that have been out for a while, and talk about how they did. Just to sort of talk about The Girl on the Train, which we talked about last weekend. It held, basically it dropped 50%, which is okay. A wide release dropping anywhere from like 40 to like mid 50s is considered pretty normal. Anything above 55, when you get into the 60s, that's not good, unless it's a horror movie. Horror movies always pop off their opening weekend and then have massive drops their second weekends. So Girl on Train had a fairly average drop off at a negative 51% from last weekend. It did 11.9 million, about $10,000 below Kevin Hart's new movie. So just in third there. It actually opened on, they actually added The Girl on Train to more theaters last weekend, so it was up to about 50 theaters. Its per theater average was $3,600. Not terrible. I talked at length about this movie last week, but it's worth sort of noting again that, Girl on the Train was sort of seen as a Gone Girl copy. The trailer indicated that it was, in a very sort of specific way. It was just like, oh, this looks like Gone Girl. Great. I can go see that. And then when you go watch it, I thought, it just seemed really trashy, and it clearly was not David Fincher directing it. And I think a lot of the people who saw it as well, it had a B- cinema score, which is bad. Anything below, B and below is not good. A B- is just pretty bad for a new release on cinema score. So it seems like audiences had very mixed feelings about it. So it had a decent drop. It wasn't like a 60% drop, which was the case for The Birth of a Nation. So that its second weekend, it only made $2.7 million. So that was a 61% drop from the weekend before. And I sort of went through a lot of stuff last week about how and why The Birth of a Nation underperformed. Essentially, the story there is that, huge Sundance hype for Birth of the Nation. They tried to go a sort of different route and release it wide instead of doing the art house limited release. Putting it up in Los Angeles, New York for a couple weeks, and expanding out to cities like Chicago or Houston or Atlanta. They decided not to go that route and just throw it out nationwide at over 2,000 theaters. It actually didn't lose any theaters this weekend, but had a 61% drop. And that's definitely on the bad side of things. Basically what that tells us is that the movie's not resonating with people, and that the people who wanted to see it saw it. It's in it last weekend, and there's not a big audience for it beyond that, and that's something that I mentioned last week, and that could be for a lot of different reasons, but it just seems like the marketing was a little too edgy and a little too incendiary. And we see that now with this drop off. No one else is going to see this movie. Like, this is going to go nowhere. I think it's going to keep dropping like this for a while. And that's too bad, because it seems like critics really liked it. It had like a 79-80% on Rotten Tomatoes. I think the cinema score was an A. And so it's too bad, because it seems like it's a pretty good movie, but it just feels like a failed release strategy. You would think that if they were going to go for awards, you just do the limited release for a while, get some hype, get people to see it, get them super excited about it, have them tweet about it, have them Snapchat about it, whatever. And that's how you get that mass audience to show up a month after you open on a limited release. But unfortunately, it just it's going to peter out pretty bad here. So its overall take is at 12 million now. I can't really see it going north. I guess it's probably not even going to go north of 30, is it? It did 7 million last. Yeah, it's probably going to end up at maybe $30 billion, maybe 25, 30. Not great, not horrific. It's not like a huge financial failure, but The Birth of a Nation should have done, I think, a lot better than this. And the one thing I didn't mention last week, and I totally forgot about this, I was all in on this movie on Hollywood Stock Exchange, which is the fantasy box office game I play. And if you're into box office at all, you have to start playing this game. I've been playing it for I don't even know when it started. I feel like I've been playing it since the 90s. My account that I have now has been active since 2006, but I know I've been playing it long before that. It's basically you buy and sell movies as stocks. And everybody was super hyped about this movie a few months ago, and then the news came out that the director and writer, Nate Parker, who had some, basically, I believe, a sexual assault case against him when he was in college. And I read the details, and I'm not going to go into it now, but it was really, really bad. And I don't want to assume that he was guilty or not guilty, but the moment I heard that and I read the details about it, I was like, this is a no-go. So I sold all my shares on Hollywood Stock Exchange, because I know the current cultural climate that we're in now, it's just you can't have any of that stuff even hinted at. And that's dangerous, right? Because you can really sort of assassinate somebody's character pretty easy with sexual assault allegations. As we're seeing with the presidential races right now, it's outrageous. So the moment I saw that, I was like, this is never going to take off, because the people that are going to see this are also the people who are hyper conscious about sexual assault and the fact that it happens all the time and nobody says anything and nobody gets prosecuted. And here you have the writer, director, and also one of the stars in the movie embroiled in this pretty nasty situation. That was a long time in his past, but that stuff stays with people. In the current cultural climate, I could just tell that was going to be a huge sort of downer about this film, and it's turned out to be true. Now, is that the reason why it did so poorly? I don't know, but I feel like it has to have something to do with it to some degree. So Birth of a Nation has definitely, I'm not going to call it a flop, but is absolutely a disappointment for Fox Searchlight and the funders of that movie. I think they thought it was going to do a lot better opening wide, but unfortunately it did not. The other sort of ones that are sort of sticking around the top 10 from last weekend and this weekend are Sully. Sully is just the train that keeps on chugging. I guess that's a term, right? It did 2.9 million. So it did more than Birth of a Nation. And Sully's been out for 6 freaking weeks. It's already at $118 million domestic box office. That's fantastic. So good. I actually did not see that movie. I really wanted to see it. I was going to go, but I don't know. I just don't like Clint Eastwood that much as a director. I did not like American Sniper at all. I thought it was a terrible film. Horribly written, horribly shot. Well acted, but I just don't like Clint Eastwood's style. Gran Torino is probably the only exception of one of his movies that I like, and of course is Unforgiven. What else is sticking around? Masterminds, that have been open for 3 weeks. It's only pulled in 1.7 million. Its total gross so far is 16 million. I feel bad for that one, just because I love Zach Galifianakis. And Owen Wilson's in that, Kristen Wiig as well. It had no audience, I don't think, or it just wasn't marketed correctly. Now, this is from the distributor Relativity. I can't remember what's going on with that company, but I feel like they went bankrupt or something along the lines of that. It was a newer company that I guess has been going since, I have to look it up here real quick, since 2010, 2011. They've released 36 films so far. I think it was one of those new distribution startups that just didn't really pan out that well. And I'm really interested in to see what their the highest opening they had for the Relativity, the distribution company. Immortals? I don't remember that movie. Act of Valor? No. Safe Haven? Limitless? I think a lot of people like that movie, I guess. So essentially, this movie, Masterminds, was dumped by Relativity, this company that's basically going out of business. That's too bad because it's a cool cast, and I think they deserve a little bit better. But it's cool for Zach Galifianakis because he's got that new movie coming out, Keeping Up with the Joneses, I think it's called, and that is coming out, I think, in a couple weeks here. Keeping Up with the Joneses is coming out next week. So I'll actually talk about that a little bit more in my later podcast later in the week. I think that's mostly it for the top 10. I guess the bylines here, the headlines are that The Accountant did very well. I think it exceeded expectations from a lot of analysts who thought it would probably do low 20s at best, probably high teens. I got it totally wrong and said it was going to be 13.5 million. Kevin Hart sort of did what people thought it was. Again, I was totally wrong about that. I thought it was only going to do about 7 million because who goes to see a concert film at the theaters? And I think Max Steel just sort of was a total flop, and everybody thought it was going to be a total flop. So that sort of wraps up this weekend and what happened. I'm going to be back later in the week to talk about the movies that are coming up this next weekend. And there's a lot. There's the new Jack Reacher. There's Keeping Up with the Joneses, which I already mentioned, the Zach Galifianakis movie. The new Ouija, what do people say? It's like, I don't know. All I remember is that I grew up Catholic and we had a little video in our church class about not to play with the Ouija board because it was a tool of the devil. In any event, the sequel to the original is coming out next week. And Boo, the Medea Halloween, and that's Tyler Perry's new movie. I actually saw the trailer to that. Looks kind of ridiculous, but who knows? Tyler Perry just has a built-in audience that goes to see his movies, so we'll have to talk about that more and analyze it a little bit more next week. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast. I will have a new episode up later in the week. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.